Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking a few minutes with me.
My pleasure.
I'm going to record the call if that's okay.
I would prefer it.
If you would like me to jump right in, I can, or if you would like to start off with a few comments, that's fine too.
No, why don't you jump right in?
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you first off, I know you're coming to Cairo next week, is what I understand. What are you doing to prepare for that trip, and what are you coming to Southern Illinois to do, see, and learn?
Well, I've gotten a lot of secondhand reports, seen a lot of pictures, read a lot of stories, and I want to see for myself what's going on, because, this could be an experience that will help us to be able to predict when things like this are going to happen, when communities are going to be placed into jeopardy. And if we can learn some things there that will prevent that from happening to others, that would be great. And also, I want to see if there's anything that can be done to really salvage the situation. In medicine, many times I was confronted with a patient who was dying. We didn't just give up because the patient was dying. We did everything we could, but we had to study the situation carefully and look and see if there were any alternatives, if there were things that could be done. Sometimes they would not be traditional things, but they got done, and in some cases we're able to save the patient. We need to look at it that way.
Talk a little bit more about what options you may be able to explore as far as being able to salvage Cairo and the housing there for folks that want to stay.
Yeah, I think we need to be cognizant and respectful of the desire to stay, because some people, that's the only thing they've ever known. The concept of moving away is a bit much for them to handle at this point.
Now, your staff, as I understand it, did spend the better part of a year looking at options. Do you still believe that there are potentials to be explored for new housing in Cairo?
Well, there's always potential. As Winston Churchill said, never give up.
Hey, Molly, it's Marin. I think there's one thing I would add is, we are continuing to look at kind of all the options that we can, and, we are always willing to talk to partners that are looking to come to town. One thing that we have done is we recently sent a letter to the county because it came to our attention that they have over $400,000 of community development block grant money. The CDBG is what it's typically referred to. Mm-hmm. And so we've asked the county to allocate that money to the Housing Authority so that we could renovate units in Thebes, which are our family units. And there's a number of units there that we can't lease up because they're currently in a state of repair that wouldn't allow us to put tenants in them. So things like that are where we're looking. We've got a multifamily property that we're trying to put up for sale. It's been in foreclosure. We've pushed that sale along. That's about 10 units that would allow people to stay in town. So we're pursuing all the options that we can in non-traditional ways and traditional ways.
Okay. Secretary Carson, you wrote a letter to the school children in Cairo, the 6th grade class that wrote to you expressing their fears and frustrations. I think you said that the decision was preceded by much hand-wringing to relocate families. Expand a little bit on your personal emotions that you experienced in arriving at that decision and making that final call.
Well, you always, have to look out for the good of whoever it is that you're trying to help. When I dealt with patients, so often, as a pediatric neurosurgeon, the children would be, oh, I'm going to die. Oh, we can't do this. Oh, it's just horrible. And then you see them a year later, the picture of health, and they're so happy. You have to really look at the long-term good and the potential that those children have. Is that potential going to be developed in Cairo, or is it going to be developed somewhere else? Those are all things that you have to consider.
And what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, Cairo's economy is in a state of devastation. A lot of people still believe in a Cairo comeback, given its location at the Mississippi and Ohio River confluence. But right now, it's a pretty devastating picture when you drive through town. What is it that you wrestle with as far as what's best for a child between their roots, and a lot of people have a strong identity in Cairo, versus moving to a community that may have more resources?
Well, you have to temper compassion with logic and common sense. And, if you allow all your decisions to be driven, just by, compassion, you're going to end up on the short end of the stick. And if you allow everything to be driven by just logic, you're going to end up on the wrong end of the stick as well. So you have to merge those two things together. And that's what causes you to really want to look at all the possibilities, not simply to exclude something.
It sounds like you're going into this trip with an open mind about the possibility that more families may be able to stay in town. If you guys could clarify that a little. I heard your explanation, Marin, about the Thebes development, and also I think what's called the Stringer building that's sitting vacant since the Delta Center closed. But are there realistic options for families with multiple children?
Well, you always keep an open mind. And, I be interested in hearing from some of the people there too. If they have some good ideas, I want to hear them.
I want to ask you a little bit about some of the comments that our U.S. senators have made. Senate Democratic Whip Dick Durbin in particular. Of course, he's from Illinois, from East St. Louis, just up the road from us. He has said in Cairo, speaking to residents, interviews with our newspaper on several occasions, that this relocation decision is basically, he's laid the fault at President Donald Trump's budget cuts, particularly, he says, where it concerns social welfare and housing programs. The quote I had pulled here, he said, resident asked him to get new housing here and declare Cairo a state of emergency. He said, I'll try, but I'll be honest, it's really hard with this new administration. The budget they came out with for this department, HUD, is not very kind, and so I don't want to create any false hope here. How do you respond to that?
Well, of course, could you take a bunch of taxpayer money and build a bunch of brand new apartments or houses and give them to people? Yes, you could. Would that be responsible without having a means to sustain the economy there? I mean, you got to look at all these things. That's what I mean when I say you can't just go on the basis of compassion and emotion. You got to integrate some common sense and logic into it.
And I'm going to follow up with this question, which you answered in part. You've heard the phrase, I'm sure, you break it, you buy it. It's common in antique stores and other stores we go in. While Cairo's economic decline has certainly happened over many, many, many years, there are a large segment of people throughout the region who feel that HUD steadied the final nail, if you will, while the former housing authority managers hammered it into the coffin. Given HUD's apparent oversight failure, is HUD responsible? And therefore, if they bear some responsibility, do they owe the people of Cairo something because of that failure?
Well, recognize that we put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the community. We've provided vouchers. We've provided counseling services. One can sit around and try to play the guilt game all day long, but it doesn't solve the problem. We still have to integrate logic into a compassion, and we have to come up with solutions that actually work.
So would you say that does the government owe them something out of the ordinary in terms of providing blanket funding for, say, a new development without the private investment piece, given what's transpired?
Well, our goal is obviously to develop people and to protect people. That's one of the functions of government. And that would not be different for the people in Cairo as it would for any place else in the country. So that's why we're involved. That's why we will remain involved and try to solve this problem to the best of our ability.
We've talked a little bit about Cairo's economy, and I know you have had quite a few staff members down there looking at these issues. Cairo's economic situation is certainly probably the most drastic in Illinois, possibly in the country. There are dozens of communities within a 100-mile radius that are not faring a whole lot better. I think it's that no longer a secret, rural America feels left behind. What is it that you're going to do at HUD in rebuilding rural economies like Cairo and all of the other near Cairos that are in our region?
Well, one of the real keys to rebuilding communities are public-private partnerships. But in order for public-private partnerships to work, you have to have an environment that has something to offer to draw the private segment into the equation. That's difficult to find in Carroll, although we will continue to look.
Is it difficult to find that in most rural communities?
Not to the extent. You get to recognize that in Carroll, you're looking at a community that has been going downhill economically, not for just a few years. This has been going on for decades. They've gone from, 15,000, to 2,000 and something. And all of the industries that used to support people have departed. These are things that have happened long before I came on the scene. But it doesn't mean that we can't learn things from this. It doesn't mean that we can't still work hard to try to provide a future for those children.
Again, a lot of people feel that Carroll is poised for economic growth, given its, many people would say, prize location at the confluence of the rivers. I understand that that is not as important as it once was in our economy, but with the Panama Canal expansion, with the Olmsted Lock and Dam project, which is just up the road about 10 minutes, nearing completion, a lot of experts are looking at that area saying this could be a prime inland river port area, and probably should have been before East St. Louis was. Is that something that your staff can play a role in as part of your rural economic talks that you're having?
We certainly would like to be involved in such conversations.
Can you talk a little bit more about what HUD is doing involving rural development? The solutions of urban America don't always translate here.
So we're clearly working with USDA on the whole rural issue. We have a task force specifically looking at things in rural areas. One of the things that's so important, obviously, is to bring communications there through broadband access in rural communities, being able to use telemedicine in rural communities, looking at innovative solutions for housing in rural communities, looking at transportation needs there, ways of delivering things in rural communities. We are going to be doing some tours of some rural sites also coming up. Again, wanting to hear directly from the people as opposed to from the bureaucrats in terms of what would be helpful to them.
So is that part of your listening tour that you're adding some rural locations to?
Yes.
Is Carroll considered part of that listening tour, or is this a special trip related to the housing crisis there?
I was particularly interested in going specifically to Carroll because of what's going on there.
Have you been to Carroll? Did you know where Carroll was prior to this issue coming to your attention?
No.
Have you had any conversations, even just in the normal course of briefings, with the president about the Carroll situation?
No.
I wanted to tell you a little bit about the historical significance of Carroll as part of a question. It is a community of significance in African American history in our country. What they called a borderland city where the South meets the North. They had a contraband camp actually for runaway slaves at the site of McBride, which you'll be visiting. Mm-hmm. Used to be called Pyramid Courts.
Well known by Huckleberry Finn.
Absolutely. And, people in that same site 80 years later, they built Pyramid Courts. It's now called McBride. At the time of the contraband camps, they talked about this being such inadequate shelter, people living in squalor. Similar things that are being said now, of course, even though that's not the same situation. Then of course the civil rights era, they had their violent battles that also took place at Pyramid Courts, which was historically built for black families, Elmwood for white families up out of the floodplain. And through all that, I just wanted to tell you that, Carroll has remained this deeply religious city. Many people now describe this fight to save Carroll as God's fight, as, driven by their faith and their belief in Carroll. It is not just a community to them, it's a religion. So I just want to ask, given all of that history that has transpired there for these families, how do you expect people to pick up and move peacefully?
Well, that's one of the reasons, as Maren told you, that we're looking at anything that is viable that will allow those people to stay, but at the same time provide opportunities for those who do want to leave and particularly for some of the young people who need to have a lot of opportunities in order to flourish, to be able to do so.
Is there a point where you would weigh a child's ability to flourish above a community's desire to survive?
I believe in choice, and I believe in providing people choice, giving them knowledge, understanding, letting them see, what exists, what the possibilities are, and then letting them move forth. One of the things I learned many, many years ago when I visited Fiji, I was shocked that they didn't have any television. And I asked some government officials, why are there no televisions here? And they said, because the people are content. We don't want them to see what is available to them. Well, I want everybody to see what's available to them and then to be able to make a choice.
Molly, Secretary has time for about one more question.
Okay. Why don't I ask you then, lastly, we've talked a little bit about rural development, and you mentioned community development block grants that they have down in Alexander County for potential in Thebes. I know those grants have been debated as part of the president's budget. What's your opinion on those CDBG grants? None of our communities down here are entitlement cities. We all get them through competitive bidding through the state. I think there are mixed opinions about that. What's your take on those grants?
Well, as I said during my confirmation hearings and budget hearings, there are good things and there are bad things that have occurred through the grant process over the years. We're looking very seriously at all of the things that occur associated with these grants, and we're going to enhance the good things and we're going to eliminate the bad things.
Fair enough. And can you speak lastly, I know you said last question, but accountability, obviously a major issue in Cairo. Will anyone ever be held accountable for what has transpired here?
Well, as you know, there already have been some disciplinary measures, and I'm very hopeful that justice will be served. There's no question that it needs to be in that case.
Thank you.
Molly, thank you. I will call you back when I get back to my office.
Thank you, Secretary. I